A woman walks into church on a Sunday morning, grabs the microphone, and tells the whole congregation that she is the pastor's secret girlfriend. What happens next reveals a shocking truth that nobody, not the elders, not the deacons, not even the pastor's own wife, ever saw coming. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Florida? London? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. No one who was there that Sunday ever forgot it. Not the old women in their best dresses. Not the young men standing at the back with their arms folded. Not the children sitting in the front rows with their freshly polished shoes. Not a single person who walked through those doors that morning would ever be able to forget what they saw, what they heard, and what it did to their hearts. It started like every other Sunday. But it did not end like one. The Grace Fellowship Church on Sunrise Boulevard was already full by the time the worship songs began. People had been arriving since early morning, carrying their Bibles under their arms, their faces still a little tired from the long week behind them, but their eyes alive with something hopeful. That is what Sunday mornings do to people. They make them feel like this week, this day, right now, something good is going to happen. The church was packed. Every wooden pew was filled from end to end. Mothers sat with small children on their laps. Old men shared pew space with teenage boys who were trying very hard to look like they wanted to be there. Young women in colorful head wraps sang with their eyes closed and their hands raised. The building itself seemed to breathe, warm and full and alive with the sound of voices lifted together. The worship band had been playing for a while and the songs had done their work. The kind of heavy tiredness that people carry in from the street had slowly lifted from the room. Shoulders had relaxed. Tight faces had softened. Even the most distracted person in the building had slowly, quietly been pulled in. The air smelled of perfume and pressed clothing and the faint sweetness of candle wax. Sunlight came in through the high windows in long golden beams, falling across the pews and the people and the polished floor like something out of a painting. It was a beautiful morning. The kind that makes you feel that everything in the world is in its right place. At the front of the church, behind the pulpit, stood Pastor Samuel Allen. He was 42 years old, not very tall, but built solidly, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady way of standing that made him look like someone nothing could push over. His voice was deep and warm, the kind of voice that fills a room completely without ever needing to shout. He had a few gray hairs at his temples now, which the older women in the congregation said made him look even more distinguished. He wore a white shirt and dark trousers, simple and clean the way he always dressed. He was not a man who needed expensive things to feel important. He had something better than that. He had the respect of nearly every person in that building, and in most of the neighborhood beyond it. Samuel had been the pastor of Grace Fellowship for 14 years. He had started with 20 people in a rented hall and built it, slowly and faithfully, into the full and thriving congregation that now filled these pews every Sunday. He had walked with his people through the hardest moments of their lives, through sicknesses and job losses, through broken families and buried children. He had laughed at their weddings and wept at their funerals. He had sat in hospital waiting rooms at midnight and knocked on doors in the rain to check on those who had gone quiet. He was not just a pastor to these people. He was a father figure, a brother, a safe place. And so, as he stood at the pulpit on this particular Sunday morning, preparing to begin his sermon, the eyes of 400 people rested on him with something that was more than attention. It was trust. In the very front row, as always, sat Esther Allen. Samuel's wife was 40 years old, and she carried herself with a kind of quiet elegance that does not need to announce itself. She had smooth dark skin and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, which was often. She wore a long skirt and a blouse with small buttons down the front, her hair pinned up carefully, her hands folded gently on the Bible in her lap. Esther was not the kind of woman who pushed herself forward or demanded to be noticed. But anyone who paid attention, anyone who watched how the church functioned, how the meals got organized, how the sick members got visited, how the crying women in the back office got listened to, anyone who really watched could see that Esther was at the center of all of it. She was the one who remembered every birthday, who showed up with food before you even knew you needed it, who sat with you in silence when words were too much, who made the church feel not like a building but like a home. Next to her sat their 2 teenage children, Daniel, 17, long-legged and quietly serious, and Claire, 14, bright-eyed and always slightly impatient, the way sharp-minded young people often are. Together, the 4 of them, Samuel, Esther, Daniel, and Claire, were what people in the congregation pointed to when they talked about what a good family looked like. A faithful family. A strong family. An example. Esther caught her husband's eye from the front row just before he opened his mouth to begin the sermon, and she gave him a small, private smile. The kind of smile that belongs only to two people. The kind that says, "I see you. I'm proud of you. Go on." Samuel smiled back. He had no idea it was the last peaceful moment he would have for a very long time. The service was almost at its end. The worship had been powerful. The offering had been taken. The announcements had been read. Pastor Samuel had just opened his Bible to the passage he was about to preach from, his reading glasses low on his nose, when something changed in the room. A movement. Near the back. Someone was standing up. At first, a few heads turned out of simple curiosity. People stand up in church for all kinds of reasons. But something about the way this person was moving, deliberately, unhurriedly, walking with a quiet purpose down the center aisle toward the altar, made more and more heads turn. And then came the whispers. Because the woman walking toward the front was not one of the regular sisters who sometimes came forward to share a testimony or request prayer. It was not one of the older women known for their emotional moments at the altar. It was not someone anyone expected to see walking up there at all. It was Angelina Harris. Angelina was 35 years old, and she was beautiful in a way that was hard to ignore. She had high cheekbones and full lips and large dark eyes that always seemed to be holding something back. Some thought, some feeling, some knowledge that she had decided not to share. She was sharp-featured and well-dressed, and she moved with a slow, certain grace that made people notice her even when she was trying not to be noticed. On this morning she was not trying to be unnoticed. She wore a red dress. Bright red, fitted close to her body, with heels that clicked softly on the polished floor as she walked. In the sober, reverent atmosphere of the Sunday service, that red dress was like a lit match dropped into a quiet room. Eyes followed her. Whispered comments passed from mouth to mouth like a current. What is she doing? Where is she going? Why is she dressed like that? Angelina had attended Grace Fellowship for just over a year. She always sat near the back, slightly apart from the main body of the congregation, as if she had deliberately chosen a seat from which she could observe without being too easily observed. She did not join the women's fellowship. She did not linger after services for the handshakes and conversation. She arrived, she sat, she worshipped quietly, and she left. Nobody had ever given her a second thought. Until now. She reached the front of the church. An usher stepped forward instinctively, the way ushers do when they are not sure what is happening but feel that they should probably do something. Angelina stopped him with a single look, calm, direct, unhurried, and he stepped back without quite knowing why. She turned to face the congregation. 400 people looked back at her in confused silence. Pastor Samuel, still standing at the pulpit, lowered his reading glasses slowly. There was a small furrow between his brows, not anger, not alarm, but the careful look of a man trying to understand something that does not yet make sense. "Sister Angelina," he said gently, "is everything all right?" She did not answer him right away. Instead, she reached out and took the microphone from its stand on the edge of the platform. Nobody stopped her. Nobody moved. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the microphone was the only sound left in it. She held the microphone in both hands, the way a person holds something they have been waiting a long time to use. And then she spoke. "I need to tell this church the truth," she said. "About me. And about your pastor." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward immediately, a sharp intake of breath here, a low murmur there, two women in the third row reaching instinctively for each other's hands. Esther Allen went very still. It was a particular kind of stillness. Not the stillness of someone who has not heard. The stillness of someone who has heard perfectly, and whose body is trying to decide what to do with what it has just received. She did not look at her husband. Not yet. Her hands, which had been resting quietly on the Bible in her lap, tightened slowly around it, just slightly, just enough for Daniel to notice and look sideways at his mother with a quick, worried glance. Up at the pulpit, Samuel had straightened. The furrow between his brows had deepened. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something gentle and redirecting, the way a pastor does when a troubled member begins to unravel in a public service, but Angelina spoke again before he could. "Pastor Samuel and I have been in a relationship," she said. "A secret relationship. For over a year." The room exploded. Not with shouting. Not at first. It was the sound of 400 people reacting at the same moment, gasps and whispers and the creak of pewwood as people shifted and turned and leaned toward each other. Someone near the back said "Lord have mercy" in a voice just loud enough to carry. An elder in the front row stood up halfway, then sat back down, then stood up again. Samuel stepped away from the pulpit. "That is not true," he said. His voice was steady. Too steady, perhaps. The voice of a man gripping himself very tightly because he knows that what he does in the next 30 seconds will matter for the rest of his life. Sister Angelina, I don't know what is happening with you today, but I want to ask you, gently and with love, to... I know about the birthmark, Angelina said. The room went quiet again. A different kind of quiet this time. She looked directly at Samuel. The birthmark on your left side. Just below your ribs. The one that is shaped like a small crescent. The one that your wife is probably the only person in this room who knows about. The silence that followed was so deep and so complete that the distant sound of a car passing outside on Sunrise Boulevard was clearly audible. Every head in the church turned, first to Angelina, then to Samuel, then to Esther. Esther Allen had not moved. She was still sitting in the front row, her hands around her Bible, her face unreadable. But her eyes, those warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far away and very dark. Claire, sitting beside her, whispered, "Mum?" Esther did not answer. At the pulpit, Samuel Allen stood with his mouth slightly open and no words coming out of it. Because the birthmark was real. It was exactly where Angelina had said it was. It was shaped exactly as she had described. And there was no explanation in the world, none that he could think of, none that he could say out loud in the next 5 seconds, for how this woman could possibly know that. The elders were on their feet now. The worship leader had stepped away from his keyboard and was standing with his hands at his sides, not knowing what to do with them. Several of the older women in the congregation were clutching each other. The children in the front row had all turned around to look at the grown-ups, reading the room the way children always do, sensing the danger before they understand it. Angelina lowered the microphone. Her face through all of it had not changed. She did not look triumphant. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had finally, at great cost, set it down. She placed the microphone back on its stand. She turned and walked back up the center aisle, her red heels clicking softly on the polished floor, the congregation parting silently on either side of her like water. She walked through the double doors at the back of the church. And she was gone. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, every face in Grace Fellowship Church turned back toward the front. Toward the man at the pulpit. Toward the woman in the front row. Toward the 2 teenagers sitting beside their mother, Daniel, who had gone rigid and pale, and Claire, who was crying quietly without making a sound. Pastor Samuel Allen stood at the pulpit of the church he had built with 14 years of his life, and he looked at his wife. Esther was already looking at him. What passed between them in that moment, in that long, terrible second before anyone spoke or moved, was not something that could be put into words. It was not anger, not yet. It was something older and deeper than anger. It was the look of a person watching the ground they have trusted their whole life open up beneath their feet. "Esther," Samuel began. She stood up. She gathered her Bible and her handbag in one smooth, quiet motion, the way a woman does when she has decided something. She took Claire gently by the arm. She said one word very softly to Daniel. Then she walked out of the church. She did not look back. And the 400 people of Grace Fellowship sat in their pews and watched the pastor's family leave, and not one of them, not the elders, not the deacons, not the oldest and wisest among them, had any idea that what they had just witnessed was not the truth at all. It was the beginning of the longest lie any of them would ever live inside. The church did not know what to do with itself. For a few long minutes after Esther and the children had gone, nobody spoke above a whisper. People sat in their pews the way people sit when they have just witnessed an accident, stunned and a little ashamed of having seen it and not sure whether to stay or go. Then Elder Raymond, a short, wide-shouldered man of 60 with a gray beard and the kind of face that had made difficult decisions before, stood up from the front row and walked to the pulpit. He put a firm but gentle hand on Samuel's arm and leaned in close. "Come with me, Pastor," he said quietly. "Let's go to the office." Samuel moved like a man walking in his sleep. His Bible was still open on the pulpit. He did not pick it up. He did not look at the congregation as Elder Raymond guided him off the platform and through the side door. Someone, nobody could quite remember who, eventually stood at the front of the church and told the congregation in a tight, careful voice that the service was over and everyone should go home and pray. There would be a statement from the elders in due course. People began to leave. Slowly at first, then all at once, the way water breaks through a dam. And as they went, through the double doors, down the steps, out into the bright Sunday morning that now felt obscene in its cheerfulness, they did something that people have done since the beginning of time when they witness something they cannot explain. They talked. By Sunday evening, the whole neighborhood knew. By Monday morning, It had spread to the surrounding streets, the nearby churches, the schools where Daniel and Claire went. By Tuesday, someone had posted about it on a community social media page, being careful to use initials and not full names, but in a way that made it perfectly obvious who was being discussed. The post was shared 47 times before noon. Samuel knew none of this. He had spent Sunday afternoon in the church office with 3 of the senior elders, Elder Raymond, Elder George, and a younger elder named Patrick, who kept cleaning his glasses nervously, answering their questions as calmly and as clearly as he could. "I have never had any kind of romantic relationship with Angelina Harris," he told them. "Not a conversation, not a meal, not a private meeting of any kind. I barely know the woman. She has been attending this church for about a year. I know her name. I have greeted her after services perhaps 4 or 5 times. That is the full extent of my knowledge of her." The elders listened. They wrote things down on a yellow notepad. Elder Raymond's face gave nothing away. Elder George nodded slowly and kept his eyes on Samuel throughout, the way someone looks when they want very much to believe something but are not yet sure that they can. Elder Patrick cleaned his glasses a 4th time. "The birthmark, Samuel," Elder Raymond said finally, in the voice of a man who wishes he did not have to say what he is about to say. "You understand that we have to address the birthmark." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "She described it accurately? The location? The shape?" "Yes." Another silence. "Do you have any explanation for how she could have known about it?" Samuel looked at his hands on the table. They were very still. He was a man who had always believed that the truth, clearly and calmly stated, could defend itself. He had believed that for his entire adult life. He was beginning, in this small room with its closed door and its yellow notepad, to feel the first cold tremor of doubt about that belief. "No," he said. "I have no explanation." Elder Raymond sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Samuel," he said at last, "I want you to know that I have known you for 11 years. I have watched you pastor this congregation with faithfulness and integrity. I have seen how you love your family. I have seen how you love these people." He paused. "I want to believe you. But," Samuel said. Elder Raymond looked at him directly. "But I have a responsibility to this church that is bigger than what I want." They suspended him the same evening. Not permanently, they were careful to say that. It was a temporary suspension, pending a full investigation. He was asked to step back from all pastoral duties. He was asked not to contact members of the congregation individually during the investigation period. He was asked to make himself available for further meetings. He was handed a typed letter to this effect, which Elder Patrick had apparently prepared in advance, which meant they had decided before the meeting began. Samuel took the letter. He folded it in half. He put it in his pocket. He thanked the elders for their time, which was perhaps the most dignified thing he did in that entire terrible day, and he walked out of the church into the Sunday evening air. He stood on the steps for a moment, breathing. The street was quiet. The sun was going down behind the buildings across the road, painting the sky a deep, burning orange. A dog was barking somewhere 2 streets over. A child was calling out to another child in a yard nearby, some game that still needed finishing before dark. The world was continuing. That was the strange thing. The world was simply continuing. Samuel walked the 3 streets home. The house was lit inside. He could see the light through the front window as he came up the path. He could hear no voices. He stood at his own front door for a full minute before he put his key in the lock. He was not sure what he was afraid of finding. He was not sure he had the right to be afraid of anything, standing on the outside of his own home. He turned the key. Esther was in the kitchen. She was not cooking. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she was not drinking, both hands wrapped around it, looking at nothing in particular on the far wall. She looked up when he came in. They had been married for 19 years. In that time, Samuel had seen every version of his wife's face. The laughing version, the tired version, the frightened version when Claire was sick as a baby, the proud version when Daniel gave his first school speech. He knew her face better than he knew any other face in the world. He did not recognize the one she was wearing now. Was not angry. That almost would have been easier. It was the face of a woman who has gone somewhere very quiet inside herself and is not sure yet whether she is coming back out. "Where are the children?" he asked. "Their rooms," she said. Her voice was flat. Not cold exactly. Empty. He sat down across the table from her. He put his hands flat on the table between them, a gesture that meant nothing except that he did not know what else to do with them. "Esther," he said, "I need you to hear me. What that woman said today is not true. Not a word of it is true. I have never. How did she know about the birthmark, Samuel? He had known the question was coming. He had been turning it over in his mind for 6 hours. He still had no answer. I don't know, he said. Esther looked at him. Just looked at him. For a long time. You don't know, she repeated. I don't know. I swear to you, Esther. On everything we have built. On our children. On every year of this marriage. I have never been with that woman. I have never been alone with that woman. I do not know how she knew what she knew. Esther was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. Upstairs, through the ceiling, the faint sound of music from Daniel's room. She knew, Samuel, Esther said at last. Her voice was very soft. Almost a whisper. She stood up in front of 400 people and described something that only I should know. And you're telling me you have no explanation. I'm telling you the truth. Esther looked down at her tea. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. I've been sitting here for 5 hours, she said, trying to think of a single good reason why a woman would do what she did today if it wasn't true. Make herself that vulnerable in front of a church full of people. Risk everything, her reputation, her dignity, everything, for a lie. She paused. I can't think of one. Esther. I need you to sleep in the guest room tonight, she said. She stood up, took her untouched tea to the sink, poured it away, set the cup down carefully, and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Samuel sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was very quiet around him. The house that he and Esther had chosen together. The house where their children had grown up. The house where he had read Bible stories at bedtime, and fixed the leaking tap twice, and painted the hallway the wrong color and then repainted it the right one. The house that smelled of their life. He sat very still and listened to its silence. The guest room was small and smelled of clean sheets and disuse. It had a single window that looked out onto the side passage between their house and the neighbor's fence. There was a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small lamp on a table beside it. Esther kept a spare blanket folded on the chair for when her sister visited. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time before he turned the lamp on. He did not sleep. Not really. He lay on top of the blanket fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around him. At some point in the early hours of the morning he heard Claire get up and go to the bathroom. He heard the soft click of her door closing again. He heard nothing from Daniel's room at all, which told him that Daniel, like his father, was lying awake in the dark. Samuel thought about going to knock on Daniel's door. He thought about it for a long time. In the end he did not go because he did not know what he would say, and he had learned long ago that silence is better than words that are not ready. He lay in the guest room and watched the thin gray light of morning slowly fill the window, and he prayed. Not the organized, purposeful kind of prayer he was used to, the kind with a clear beginning and a clear direction and a clear end. This was different. This was the kind of prayer that is barely even words. The kind that is just a person turning their face toward God in the dark and hoping to be seen. I don't know what is happening. I don't know how to fix it. I need you to see me right now because I don't know if anyone else does. That was all. It was, he would think later, the most honest prayer he had ever prayed in his life. Monday came the way difficult days always do, without warning and without mercy, just suddenly there, full of things that had to be faced. Samuel was up before anyone else in the house. He showered and dressed quietly, made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. He heard Esther's alarm go off upstairs at 6:30. He heard her moving around. He heard her come to the top of the stairs. Then he heard her stop. She had reached the point where she would either come down or go back to the bedroom. He did not move. He did not call out to her. After a moment he heard her go back. He drank his coffee alone. When Claire came down 20 minutes later, still in her school uniform but with her blazer unbuttoned and her tie not yet done, she stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw him. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked very young. Younger than 14. She looked, in that moment, exactly like she had looked at 4 years old, standing in the doorway of their old apartment during a thunderstorm, not sure whether to be brave about it or not. "Dad," she said. "Morning, sweetheart," he said as gently as he could. She came in and sat down beside him, not across from him, right beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. She did not say anything. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him and they sat like that for a while without speaking. Then she said very quietly into the front of his shirt, "It's not true, is it, Dad?" It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "It is not true." She was quiet for another moment. "I know," she said. "Just that. I know." It was the first time since the previous morning that Samuel had felt anything other than cold, and it hit him so hard and so suddenly that he had to press his lips together and look at the far wall and breathe very carefully for a few seconds. "Go and do your tie," he said at last. "I'll make you some toast." Daniel came down just before 7. He was fully dressed, school bag over one shoulder, face closed and careful the way teenage boys' faces get when they are feeling something they have decided not to show. He was tall like Samuel and had his mother's eyes, and those eyes, when they found his father's across the kitchen, held something complicated in them. Not anger, not quite, but something close to it, mixed with something else that might have been grief. "Morning," Daniel said. "Morning," Samuel said. Daniel poured himself a glass of water. Drank it standing at the sink. Set the glass down. "People are talking at school," he said to the window above the sink. "I saw it on the community page last night. They didn't use your name but everyone knows." Samuel said nothing. "A boy in my year texted me," Daniel continued, "to tell me he'd seen it." He put a prayer hands emoji. The way he said it made it clear that the prayer hands emoji had not felt like prayer at all. "Daniel, I know you didn't do it, Dad." He turned around. His jaw was set, his voice very even with the careful control of someone much older. "I know you. I know who you are. But that doesn't change what it's like to be me at school today." He picked up his bag. "I just need you to know that." He walked out of the kitchen. A moment later the front door opened and closed. Samuel stood at the counter with a piece of toast in his hand that he was no longer interested in eating. Outside the morning went on. Cars. Birdsong. A neighbor's gate. The world still continuing. The investigation, such as it was, lasted 3 weeks. The elders spoke to Angelina Harris once, by phone, because she refused to come in person. She maintained everything she had said from the Sunday. She was calm and consistent and added no new details. She gave them nothing to contradict and nothing new to work with. They spoke to Samuel 4 more times. He was equally consistent, but in his case consistency without evidence is a different thing. Consistency without evidence is just stubbornness. Or worse, it is what a practiced liar looks like. They spoke to several members of the congregation who had noticed any interaction between Samuel and Angelina over the past year. 2 people recalled seeing them exchange a few words at the door after a service. One woman thought she remembered seeing them standing together near the car park after an evening prayer meeting. She was not sure. She thought it might have been a different evening. But she was not sure. Small things. Ordinary things. The ordinary things that happen between a pastor and a member of his congregation and mean nothing at all, until suddenly they mean everything. The elders wrote a report. The report concluded that, given the nature of the accusation, the specific nature of the evidence presented, namely the birthmark, and the impossibility of fully disproving the claim, they could not, in good conscience, restore Samuel to pastoral duties at this time. They expressed their sympathy for the difficulty of the situation. They encouraged Samuel to continue seeking God and to make himself available to the process. The report was 4 pages long and every page of it was a kind of quiet, careful, institutional cowardice dressed up as responsibility. Samuel read it sitting alone in his car outside the church building. He read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in the glove compartment and drove home. He did not cry. He wanted to. He sat in the car in his own driveway with his hands on the steering wheel and the engine ticking as it cooled, and he felt something cracking open inside his chest. Not breaking exactly but splitting slowly the way old wood splits along its grain when the weather changes. He went inside. He put the kettle on. He sat down. The house was empty. Esther had been taking the children to school and spending her days at her sister Margaret's house across the city. She came home in the evenings, made dinner, spoke to the children about their days, and spoke to Samuel only about practical things. "Pass the salt. I need the car tomorrow morning." The electricity bill came. They had not had a real conversation in 3 weeks. It was on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the elder's report, that Esther sat down across the table from him after the children had gone to bed, and said what she had been building toward for a month. She did not raise her voice. That was the thing about Esther. She never raised her voice. She said the most devastating things in the quietest tone, as though she were discussing something ordinary, and somehow that made each word land harder. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I need to do." Samuel looked at her across the table. He waited. "I've been trying," she said. "Every day I've been trying to find a way to hold on to what I know about you and put the rest aside. And I've prayed about it. I've prayed more in the last month than I've prayed in the last 3 years put together." She was quiet for a moment. "But I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is that woman standing in the church describing your birthmark. And I can't make that go away." "Esther," he said, "I promise you, I believe that you believe what you're saying, she said. And somehow that was worse than if she had simply called him a liar. I do. I look at you and I believe that you believe it. But I don't know, Samuel. I don't know what is true anymore. And I cannot stay in a house where I don't know what is true. The kitchen clock ticked. I'm going to stay at Margaret's for a while, she said. I'll take the children. You can stay here. Esther, please? I'm not saying it's forever. Her voice was still very quiet. Very steady. Like a woman who has rehearsed this many times in the dark. I'm saying I need some space to think. I need to be somewhere where I can breathe without the question sitting on top of me. Samuel looked at his hands on the table. The same hands he had pressed flat on this same table a month ago, trying to show her they had nothing to hide. And the children? He said. They will see you. Of course they will see you. I'm not going to keep your children from you. She paused. But Claire is struggling at school. And Daniel is angry in a way I don't know how to reach. They need some stability right now. They need to be somewhere where things are calm. He wanted to say, this is my home. This is my family. You are asking me to lose everything because of something I did not do. He wanted to say it loudly, the way a man says things when he has been quiet too long and the quiet is killing him. But he looked at Esther's face, at the exhaustion in it and the sorrow, and the terrible honesty of a woman who is not leaving because she wants to but because she cannot find another way to survive, and he said nothing. Okay, he said. Just that one word. Esther nodded. She stood up. She paused at the kitchen door and turned back just for a moment. I'm sorry, Samuel, she said. I'm sorry that this is where we are. Then she was gone. And Samuel Allen sat alone again at his kitchen table, in his quiet house, with the clock ticking and the weight of everything that had been taken from him pressing down on his chest like a stone. They left on a Saturday morning. Esther had packed during the week, quietly, a little at a time, the way you do things when you don't want them to feel as final as they are. 2 large suitcases. A box of the children's things. Claire's school bag and Daniel's football boots and the small framed photograph from the hallway, the one taken on a beach somewhere years ago, all 4 of them squinting into the sun and laughing at something just outside the frame. Samuel stood in the doorway and watched them load Margaret's car. He had offered to help. Esther had said it was fine, she had it. He stood in the doorway anyway because he could not think of anything else to do with himself. Claire hugged him before she got in the car. She held on tight and for a long time and he pressed his cheek against the top of her head and breathed in the smell of her shampoo and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make any of this smaller. Daniel put his bag in the boot and then came and stood in front of his father. He was almost as tall as Samuel now. He put out his hand the way men do and Samuel shook it, and then Daniel pulled him in quickly, just for a second, one hard embrace, and then stepped back and got in the car without looking at him again. Esther was last. She came to where he stood in the doorway and stopped a few feet away. She was wearing a gray coat he had always liked. Her hair was down. She looked, in that moment, terribly familiar and terribly far away at the same time. I'll call you about the children's schedule, she said. Okay, he said. She looked at him for just a moment longer than was necessary. Something moved across her face, not quite regret, not quite tenderness, not quite anything he could name. Then she turned and walked to the car and got in. He watched them drive away until the car turned the corner and was gone. Then he went back inside and closed the front door behind him. The house had been quiet before. Now it was something worse than quiet. Now it was empty. The first thing that went was the income. Grace Fellowship had been his livelihood for 14 years. He had never been a rich man, pastors of neighborhood churches rarely are, but he had been comfortable. There had been enough. Now the monthly stipend stopped, the way these things stop, with a politely worded letter and a final payment and a line at the bottom about how the church continued to hold him in prayer. He found a job within 2 months. Manual work, loading and unloading at a distribution warehouse on the edge of the city. It was hard, physical work, the kind that leaves you with aching shoulders and dust in your throat at the end of the day. He was, by some distance, the oldest man on his shift. The others were mostly young men in their 20s who played music through their earphones and talked about football during the breaks. They did not know who he was. Nobody out there knew who he was. That was, in its way, a relief. He took the bus to work at 5 in the morning and came home at 3 in the afternoon and sat in the kitchen of the now too big house and ate whatever he had made and then sat some more. On Wednesdays and alternate weekends, Esther brought the children to see him. Claire talked too fast and too brightly, the way she did when she was trying to fill a silence she found frightening. Daniel was courteous and careful and kept his feelings somewhere Samuel could not reach them. He did not go back to Grace Fellowship. He could not. He heard, through small pieces of information that found their way to him without his asking for them, that they had found a new pastor, a younger man very energetic with a background in youth ministry. The congregation had rallied. Numbers were up. The church had moved on. This did not surprise him. Churches move on. People move on. The world moves on. He was the only thing, it seemed, that was standing still. The house went 6 months later. Without the pastoral income and with the warehouse wage covering only the basics, the mortgage became impossible. He sold it quietly and quickly, which meant he got less than it was worth, which was how these things went. He took the money that was left after the bank was paid and rented a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building on a street that smelled of exhaust fumes and fried food. 2 rooms. A bathroom with a window that stuck. A kitchen with a view of a concrete wall. He carried his things up the stairs in boxes on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, 3 trips up and 3 trips down, and when it was done he sat on the floor of the empty living room because there was no furniture yet, and he looked at the 4 walls around him and tried to find something to hold on to. He opened his Bible. Not to any particular passage. He just opened it the way you open a letter from someone you love when you are very far away from home. The pages fell open near the middle. His eyes found a line that he had underlined years ago in blue pen, so long ago that he could not remember doing it. He restores my soul. He read it 3 times. Then he closed the Bible and sat in the empty room and let himself, finally, after months of holding himself together with both hands, cry. It was not a graceful kind of crying. It was not quiet. It was the kind of crying that comes from very deep down, from the place where a man keeps all the things he has decided to be strong about, and it went on for a long time, there on the floor of that empty room with the rain against the window and the smell of exhaust fumes coming up from the street below. When it was over he felt empty. But it was a cleaner kind of empty than before. He got up. He found the box with the kettle in it. He made himself a cup of tea. He sat on the floor and drank it. Tomorrow he would buy a chair. The years did not pass quickly. That is something people say, that time passes quickly when you are not paying attention. Samuel paid attention. He had nothing else to do but pay attention. The years passed slowly and each one left its mark. He turned 43 in the warehouse, eating a sandwich at the break table while the young men around him argued about a football match. Nobody knew it was his birthday. He had not told anyone. He turned 45 in the small apartment, alone, with a phone call from Claire that lasted 20 minutes and made him feel, for the length of that call, almost like himself. Daniel texted. A short message. Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you're okay. He stared at those 8 words for a long time, reading everything that was in them and everything that wasn't. He turned 47 sitting on a bench in a park near the apartment, watching pigeons. He had started doing that, sitting in the park watching ordinary things. Pigeons. Children on the swings. Old couples on benches. He found something comforting in the smallness of it. The world going about its business without requiring anything from him. Word reached him when he was 48 that Esther had remarried. It came from Margaret, Esther's sister, who called him on a Tuesday evening with the careful, apologetic voice of someone delivering information they wished they did not have to deliver. His name was Robert. He was a civil engineer. He was kind, Margaret said, as if that were the most important thing to say. He was good to the children. Samuel thanked Margaret for telling him. He said he was glad Esther had found someone. He meant it. That was the hardest part, that he genuinely, truly meant it, and it hurt just as much as if he hadn't. He put the phone down and sat in his chair by the window and looked out at the concrete wall and the narrow strip of evening sky above it. 19 years of marriage. 2 children. A home. A life. All of it resting on the word of a woman he had barely known, and a birthmark he had been born with and could not explain. He thought about anger. He had thought about it many times over the years. He had held it up and examined it, the way you examine something you have found and are not sure what to do with. There was anger in him. He could feel it the way you can feel a bruise without pressing it. But he had made a decision very early on, not to let it become the loudest thing in him. Not because he was not entitled to it, but because he had watched, over 14 years of pastoring, what anger does to a person when they feed it every day. He had sat with too many people whose bitterness had eaten everything else in them. He did not want to become that. So he kept the anger in its place. He took it out sometimes, looked at it, put it back. And he prayed. Every day in the small apartment, with the concrete wall outside the window and the sounds of the city all around him. Not the polished, public prayers of a pastor performing faith in front of a congregation. Just a man and God, and the long silence between them in which somehow, impossibly, something like peace still lived. 15 years is a long time. Long enough for a city to change around you, new buildings going up, old ones coming down, familiar shops replaced by things you don't recognize. Long enough for the people who knew your name to forget it, and for the people who whispered it to find something newer and more interesting to whisper about. Long enough for a man to become, in the eyes of the world that once knew him, simply a man who used to be someone else. Samuel was 57 years old now. His hair had gone almost entirely gray. His face had deepened. More lines, more weight in the eyes, the particular look of a person who has carried something heavy for a long time and has learned, not to put it down but to carry it more quietly. He still worked, though not at the warehouse anymore. His knees had made that impossible 2 years earlier. He now worked at a small hardware shop 3 streets from his apartment, helping customers find things, cutting keys, mixing paint. It was quiet work. He was good at it. He had built, over 15 years, a very small life. Careful and contained, like a fire built just big enough to keep warm by, never bigger. He had a few neighbors he greeted by name. A bench in the park that he thought of as his. A shelf of books beside the chair by the window. A Bible so worn that the cover was held on with a rubber band. He had his children, not often enough, never often enough, but he had them. Claire was 32 now, married to a gentle man named Thomas, with a daughter of her own, 18 months old, who had Esther's eyes and Samuel's nose and who laughed at absolutely everything. Daniel was 34, a secondary school teacher living across the city, who called his father every Sunday evening without fail. Conversations that were careful at first and then gradually, over years, had become something warmer. Not what they once were, but something real. He had these things. He held them carefully. He did not expect anything else. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning in October, a man knocked on the door of the hardware shop and changed everything. His name was Pastor Jeremiah. He was 62 years old, small and neat, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the quick, direct manner of a man who has learned not to waste time. He had been the pastor of a church on the other side of the city for 20 years. Samuel did not know him. They had never crossed paths. He came into the shop just after opening time, when Samuel was alone behind the counter checking a delivery order. The bell above the door rang. Samuel looked up. The man was looking at him with the careful, slightly uncomfortable expression of someone who has been rehearsing what they are about to say for a considerable distance. "Are you Samuel Allen?" he asked. Samuel set down his pen. "Yes. My name is Martin Jeremiah. I'm a pastor." He paused. "I wonder if I could talk to you. It's important. I'm sorry to come like this without warning. I wasn't sure you would agree to see me if I called ahead." Samuel looked at him for a moment. The man did not look dangerous. He looked, if anything, like a man carrying a weight he was relieved to be close to putting down. "I was just about to make coffee," Samuel said. "Come around the back." They sat in the small stock room behind the shop, among the shelves of paint tins and boxed fittings, on 2 folding chairs that Samuel kept there for his lunch breaks. Samuel made 2 cups of instant coffee and handed one across. Pastor Jeremiah held it with both hands and did not drink it immediately. "I want to start by saying that what I'm about to tell you is something I should perhaps have found a way to tell you sooner," he said. "I have been trying to find you for almost a year. You are not an easy man to locate." "I wasn't trying to be found," Samuel said. "No. I understand that." Jeremiah looked down at his cup. Then he looked up, directly at Samuel, the way a man looks when he has decided to say a difficult thing cleanly and without decoration. "Angelina Harris is dying. She has been in the hospital for 4 months. Aggressive cancer. She is not going to recover." The stock room was very quiet. The faint sound of traffic from the street outside. The hum of a refrigerator in the corner. Samuel said nothing. 3 months ago," Jeremiah continued, "she called my church and asked to speak to a pastor. I don't know why she chose us. Perhaps she opened a phone book. Perhaps she had heard the church name somewhere. I don't know." He paused. "I went to the hospital. I sat with her. She was very weak but very clear. And she told me everything." Samuel's hands, resting on his knees, were very still. "She told me about the Sunday service," Jeremiah said. "About what she said. About your suspension. About your family." He stopped. The word family sat in the air between them for a moment. "And she told me that it was not true. None of it. She and you never had any kind of relationship. She fabricated the entire accusation." The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car horn sounded briefly, then stopped. Samuel looked at a spot on the concrete floor between his feet. He looked at it for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very even, not cold, not hard, but stripped of everything except the plain fact of what he was asking. "Why?" he said. Jeremiah set his coffee down on the shelf beside him. "She had developed a deep obsession with you. Over the years she attended your church, she described it as falling in love with you, though I think it was something more complicated and darker than that. She said she had never felt that way about anyone and it frightened her. She tried, she said, to simply leave, to stop attending the church, to put the feeling behind her. But she couldn't. And when she finally accepted that you would never, that there was nothing there, that you were simply her pastor and nothing more, something in her broke. He paused. He seemed to be choosing his words with care. She said she couldn't bear the idea of watching you continue your life. Your ministry, your marriage, your family. All of it continuing perfectly while she was in pain. She wanted to take something from you. She knew it was wrong. She said she knew even as she was doing it that it was wrong. But she did it anyway. Samuel was still looking at the floor. The birthmark, he said. She told me about that too. Jeremiah leaned forward slightly. 2 years before the Sunday she made the accusation, you had a minor surgery at the city hospital. A routine procedure. You were sedated. She had a friend, a nurse at that hospital. She asked the friend to look. And the friend told her. The simplicity of it was almost the worst part. Not some elaborate scheme. Not some complicated plan. Just a woman asking a favor from a friend making a decision she should never have made, and a man's entire life breaking apart on the back of it. Samuel closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a moment. When he opened them he looked at Jeremiah with the expression of a man who is feeling many things at the same time and is not ready to name any of them yet. She is asking for your forgiveness, Jeremiah said quietly. She asked me to find you and tell you the truth and ask you. She said she could not die with this. She said she didn't deserve your forgiveness but she was asking for it anyway. Those were her words. The stockroom was very quiet. Samuel stood up slowly. He walked to the small window set high in the wall above the paint shelves, the one that looked out onto the side alley and let in a thin rectangle of gray October sky. He stood with his back to Jeremiah for a while, looking up at that small piece of sky. Jeremiah waited. He was a man who had learned when not to speak. 15 years, Samuel said at last. Not to Jeremiah exactly. To the window, to the sky, to the long space of those years themselves. 15 years of my life. Yes, Jeremiah said. My wife left. My children grew up without me in the house. My ministry, everything I built over 14 years. He stopped. He was not angry, or he was not only angry. His voice had something else in it, something that was almost wondering, as though he was still, even now, slightly unable to believe the full weight of what one lie had done. All of it. Gone. Because of a birthmark and a nurse who should have known better. Jeremiah said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. Sometimes the right response to a terrible truth is simply to let it be terrible without trying to make it smaller. Samuel turned around. He looked at Jeremiah across the small room. Is she conscious? He said. Is she able to have a conversation? On good days, Jeremiah said carefully. Not many of those left, I think. Samuel nodded slowly. He looked at the folding chair where he had been sitting, and the untouched cup of coffee beside it. He looked at the shelves of paint tins and the delivery order on his clipboard and the ordinary Tuesday morning contents of his ordinary Tuesday morning life. Then he looked back at Jeremiah. Tell me which hospital, he said. He did not go that day. He needed to think first. He needed to sit with what he had been told and turn it over slowly, the way you turn something fragile over in your hands before you decide what to do with it. He gave Jeremiah his phone number. Jeremiah gave him the name of the hospital and the ward number and the name Angelina was registered under, and then shook his hand at the door of the shop with both of his own hands, the grip of a man who is deeply relieved to have done what he came to do. Samuel watched him go. Then he turned the shop sign to closed, though it was barely 10 in the morning, and he sat behind the counter for a long time doing nothing at all. He called the shop owner, Mr. Hennessy, an elderly man who asked no questions and trusted Samuel completely, and told him he needed the rest of the day. Mr. Hennessy said, fine, no problem, take care of yourself. Samuel thanked him and hung up. Then he put on his coat and walked to the park and sat on his bench. It was a cold morning. The trees had lost most of their leaves and stood bare and dark against the gray sky. A woman was pushing a pram along the path nearby. 2 boys were kicking a ball against the fence at the far end. Everything was ordinary and quiet and completely indifferent to the fact that Samuel Allen's entire understanding of the last 15 years of his life had just shifted underneath him like ground in an earthquake. He sat there for 2 hours. He thought about Angelina. He tried, as he always did when he thought about her, to find something coherent in what she had done. He had tried many times over the years. He had never quite managed it. Obsession he could understand in the abstract. He had pastored enough people in the grip of it to know how it works, how it grows in the dark, how it stops looking like what it is and starts looking like something else entirely. But to walk into a church and say those words in front of 400 people. To look at a family, at a woman, at 2 children, and do that to them. That he had never been able to hold in his mind as something a person simply does. And yet she had done it. And now she was dying in a hospital ward, asking for his forgiveness. He thought about forgiveness. He had preached about it many times. He knew the theology of it thoroughly. He knew the arguments, that forgiveness is not absolution, that it is something you do for yourself as much as for the person you forgive, that holding bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to be harmed by it. He believed all of that. He had believed it through all 15 years of living in the damage her lie had caused, and believing it had, perhaps, been the thing that kept him from being consumed. But believing in forgiveness as a principle and walking into a hospital room to offer it to a specific woman in a specific bed was a different thing entirely. He sat on the bench and was honest with himself about that. He went home. He made dinner. He sat by the window. He prayed. He went the next morning. The hospital was large and beige and smelled of disinfectant and floor cleaner and the particular institutional exhaustion of a building that never fully sleeps. Samuel walked through the main entrance and followed the signs to the ward Jeremiah had given him. 4th floor, East Wing. He took the lift. The doors opened onto a long corridor with pale green walls and strip lighting and the sound of a monitor beeping softly somewhere out of sight. A nurse at the station near the lift looked up. "I'm here to visit Angelina Harris," Samuel said. The nurse checked her screen. "Are you family?" "No," Samuel said. She asked to see me. Pastor Jeremiah arranged it. The nurse made a small call on the internal phone and waited and then nodded and told him it was the 3rd door on the left. He walked down the corridor. 3rd door on the left. It was slightly ajar. He stopped outside it and stood for a moment with his hand not quite touching the door, breathing steadily. Then he pushed it open and went in. He almost did not recognize her. He had not seen Angelina Harris in 15 years, and the woman he remembered, the red dress, the clicking heels, the high cheekbones and the dark eyes that held everything back, had been so vivid and so specific in his memory that he had kept her frozen there, unchanged. The woman in the bed was not that woman. She was very thin. Her skin, once smooth and rich, was dry and tight across her face. Her hair, which she had always kept immaculate, was gone. The illness and the treatment had taken it, and in its place she wore a soft cloth cap that made her look smaller than she was. She had tubes in her arm and a monitor beside her and a hospital blanket pulled up to her waist. But her eyes were the same. Dark and large and holding something, only now what they were holding was not a secret kept back from the world. It was fear. And sorrow. And something that looked like a person who has had a very long time alone in a quiet room to understand exactly what they have done. She saw him come in. She did not speak immediately. She just looked at him with those same dark eyes, and in them he could see that she had genuinely not been certain he would come. Samuel pulled the chair from against the wall and set it beside the bed and sat down. He did not say hello. He did not say anything at first. He simply sat, close enough that she could see him clearly, and he looked back at her. "You came," she said. Her voice was thin and slightly rough. Not the clear, carrying voice that had filled the church that Sunday morning. A smaller voice. A voice that had been through something. "I came," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the ceiling and her throat moved as she swallowed. "I don't know how to start," she said. "You don't have to start anywhere in particular," Samuel said. "Just say what you need to say." She was quiet for a little while. The monitor beeped. Somewhere down the corridor a door opened and closed. "I lied," she said. "Everything I said that Sunday. All of it. There was nothing between us. There was never anything between us. You never did anything wrong." She stopped. She seemed to be steadying herself, the way people do when the effort of speaking is physical as well as emotional. "I knew what I was doing. I want you to know that. I wasn't sick, not in the way that would excuse it. I knew exactly what I was doing and I did it anyway." Samuel listened. He did not interrupt. "I told myself things," she continued. "I told myself that you had led me on. That your kindness, the way you spoke to people, the way you made everyone feel seen, that it meant something special. Something that was just for me." She paused. "I know that wasn't true. I think I knew it even then. But pain makes you believe the things that help you bear it." "How did you know about the surgery?" Samuel said. His voice was quiet and careful. Not accusing. Just asking. She turned her head on the pillow to look at him directly. "A friend. A nurse here, she was working at the other hospital when you had the procedure. I asked her. I should never have asked her and she should never have told me and we were both wrong. She closed her eyes briefly. I had the information for 2 years before I used it. 2 years I carried it around, telling myself I would never do anything with it. And then one Sunday morning I got up and put on a red dress and did the worst thing I have ever done. The room was very quiet. Samuel looked at her hands on the blanket. They were very still. They were the hands of a woman who had made peace with not having much time left. I took your wife, she said. The words came out barely above a whisper. I took your children. I took your church. I took 15 years of your life. She stopped. Her eyes were bright now, not with the old sharpness but with something wet and urgent. And I know that me lying here dying does not pay any of that back. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But Pastor Jeremiah said, he said you were a man of faith. And I thought, I hoped. She stopped again. I don't want to die carrying this, she said. Samuel sat with that for a moment. He thought about the guest room on the night Esther asked him to sleep there. He thought about Daniel's 8-word birthday text. He thought about the empty apartment and the folding chair and the rubber band holding his Bible together. He thought about 15 years of Tuesday mornings and Wednesday evenings and Sunday nights alone. He thought about all of it. And then he leaned forward slightly in the chair, and he looked at Angelina Harris, this thin, frightened, dying woman who had taken so much from him, and he said something that cost him more than anything he had ever preached from a pulpit, and meant more and was truer. I forgive you, he said. Not loudly. Not with ceremony. Just those 3 words said plainly in a hospital room on a gray October morning, to a woman who had not expected to receive them. Angelina looked at him. 2 tears ran down the side of her face and disappeared into the pillow. She did not make a sound. I forgive you, Samuel said again. Not because what you did was small. It was not small. It was one of the largest things one person can do to another. But I have spent 15 years choosing not to be destroyed by it, and I am not going to let you take anything else from me, not even the peace I have managed to build. So I forgive you. And I mean it. She nodded. Very slightly. The nod of someone who has received something they cannot quite carry yet but will try. Thank you, she whispered. Samuel sat with her a little longer. He did not pray with her, she did not ask and he did not offer. It did not feel like the right thing to put on top of what had just passed between them. He simply sat for a few more minutes in the quiet of the room. Then he stood up. He put the chair back against the wall. He looked at her once more, at the person beneath all of it, beneath the red dress and the lie and the years of damage, just a woman who had made a terrible choice in a moment of pain and had been living inside the consequences of it ever since, just as he had. He walked to the door. Mr. Allen, she said behind him. He turned. I wrote it down, she said. Everything. The truth. All of it with the details, the nurse's name, the hospital, everything. Pastor Jeremiah has it. She paused. In case it can do any good. For you. For your name. Samuel looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked out of the room and down the long pale green corridor and into the lift and out through the main entrance into the gray October morning. He stood on the pavement outside the hospital and breathed the cold air. He did not feel what he had expected to feel. He had half expected relief, the clean, uncomplicated relief of a verdict finally overturned. But what he felt was something more complicated and more human than that. A mixture of things he did not have exact names for. Grief still. Loss that was not going anywhere. But underneath it, or perhaps beside it, something that had been very tightly wound for a very long time loosening, just slightly, just enough to notice. He stood there for a while. Then he took out his phone and called Daniel. Daniel picked up on the 3rd ring. Dad. He sounded slightly surprised. Samuel did not usually call on weekday mornings. That was their Sunday evening arrangement, and Daniel, who liked order, had settled comfortably into it over the years. Are you at work? Samuel asked. Free period. I'm in the staff room. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong, Samuel said. And then, because that was not quite accurate, something has happened. Something I need to tell you. Not on the phone. Can you come this evening? There was a pause. The kind of pause in which a person is recalibrating, deciding how worried to be. I'll be there at 7, Daniel said. He called Claire next. She answered with the cheerful, slightly breathless voice of a woman who was doing 3 things at once, which was the only way Claire had ever done anything. Dad. Hold on, Ruby sweetheart, don't put that in your mouth. Sorry Dad, what's up? I need to tell you something important, Samuel said. This evening if you can manage it. Can you come to the flat? Bring Thomas and Ruby if you need to. The background noise on Claire's end quieted. She had put down whatever she was doing. He could tell by the quality of her attention. Dad, you're scaring me a little. Don't be scared, he said. It's not bad news. It's complicated. I'll explain everything when you're here. Just come. We'll be there, she said. He spent the rest of the day in a state of strange suspended stillness. He went back to the shop for the afternoon. He helped a woman choose a shade of yellow for her kitchen. He cut 3 keys. He swept the floor. He did ordinary things with ordinary care, the way he had been doing for 15 years, except that the ground underneath him had quietly shifted and everything ordinary now had a different weight to it. He stopped at the small supermarket on his way home and bought bread and cheese and a cooked chicken and a bottle of juice. He laid it all out on the kitchen table when he got back, not because he thought anyone would eat very much but because he was a man who had once presided over a congregation and knew that food on a table does something to a room. It says, this is a place where people are taken care of. It says you matter enough to be fed. Daniel arrived first at 7:05, still in his work clothes, dark trousers and a blue shirt with the sleeves pushed up. He was 34 now and looked it in the best way. Solid and steady and capable, the same quiet seriousness he had always had but worn more comfortably now, like a coat that finally fits. He came in and looked at the table and looked at his father and said, "Right? What's going on?" "Wait for your sister," Samuel said. Claire and Thomas arrived 12 minutes later, Claire carrying Ruby on her hip and a nappy bag over her shoulder and already talking before she was fully through the door. Thomas, a fair-haired, mild-mannered man who had learned early in his marriage that the best thing to do in almost any situation involving the Allen family was to be quietly present and supportive, shook Samuel's hand and sat down at the table and accepted a piece of bread. Ruby, 18 months old and entirely indifferent to the gravity of the occasion, immediately tried to climb off Claire's lap and reach the cheese. When they were all settled, Ruby on the floor with a crust of bread and her own small territory of table space to bang on, Samuel sat across from his children and looked at them. Daniel watching him. Claire holding Ruby absently and watching him. 2 people who had grown up in the shadow of that Sunday morning 15 years ago. Who had carried, in their different ways and through their different temperaments, the weight of it. Daniel's contained, protected anger. Claire's determined brightness, her way of talking over the difficult silences. They had built their adult lives with that weight in them, the way trees grow around wire fences, incorporating the obstruction, continuing regardless but shaped by it forever. Samuel looked at his children and felt at the same time, enormous love and enormous sorrow. Then he told them everything. He started from the beginning, from the Tuesday morning, the knock on the shop door, the man with the wire-rimmed glasses. He told them about the stock room and the 2 cups of instant coffee and what Jeremiah had said. He told them about sitting on the bench in the park. He told them about the hospital that morning, the pale green corridor, the 3rd door on the left, the woman in the bed who was barely recognizable as the woman he remembered. He told them what Angelina had confessed. All of it. The obsession. The nurse. The 2 years of knowing and then the Sunday morning she decided to use what she knew. He told it plainly and without dramatics because it did not need dramatics. The plain facts of it were enough. He watched his children's faces as he talked. Daniel went very still about halfway through, in the particular way he had gone still since he was a boy when he was feeling something strongly, a stillness that was not emptiness but its opposite, a fullness that had nowhere to go yet. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the table. He did not interrupt. Claire cried. Not noisily, she pressed her lips together and blinked hard and the tears came anyway, sliding down her face while she held Ruby against her chest and looked at her father with those wide eyes that had always, even at 14 in the front pew of a church that was falling apart, believed in him. Thomas put his hand over Claire's on the table. When Samuel finished, the kitchen was quiet. Ruby banged her crust on the table. Once, twice. Then looked around at the silent grown-ups with the cheerful bewilderment of someone too young to understand what silence means. Daniel spoke first. "The nurse," he said. His voice was very controlled. "She's still working? This person who violated patient privacy and helped destroy our family is still—" "I don't know," Samuel said. "That's not for me to pursue. Jeremiah has Angelina's written statement. What happens with it from here is in other people's hands." Other people's hands. Daniel repeated it flatly, the way you repeat something when you are not satisfied with it but recognize that arguing with it will not help. "Yes," Samuel said quietly but firmly. "I have spent 15 years choosing not to be consumed by this. I am not going to start being consumed by it now because the truth has finally come out." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slowly and not entirely willingly but genuinely. Claire reached across the table and took her father's hand. She held it with both of hers, the way she had held on to him at the front door the morning Esther left with the children. The same grip. The same Claire. "Dad," she said. And then she couldn't finish the sentence, so she just held his hand tighter instead. He turned his hand over and held hers back. "I'm all right," he said. "I want you to know that. I'm genuinely all right." "You shouldn't have had to be all right about this," she said. "You should never have had to. 15 years, Dad. 15 years of your life." "I know," he said simply. "But they were mine. However they came about, they were mine. I lived them. And I'm still here." They stayed late. Thomas put Ruby to sleep in the small bedroom. The child had no patience for adult schedules, and the three of them sat around the kitchen table long after the food had been picked over and the juice drunk, talking in the way that families talk when something large has shifted and they are all trying to find their footing in the new landscape. At some point, around 10 o'clock, Daniel said something he had clearly been working up to for a while. "Someone should tell Mum." The room went quiet again. A different kind of quiet. Samuel looked at his son. "That's not for me to do," he said carefully. "I know," Daniel said. "I'll do it." He paused. "She needs to know, Dad. She's been living for 15 years thinking. She deserves to know the truth." Samuel looked at the table. He thought about Esther. He thought about her sitting at Margaret's kitchen table somewhere on the other side of the city, going about her life, carrying her own version of that Sunday morning, not as a victim of a lie, but as a woman who had believed the lie was true. He thought about what 15 years of believing that must have felt like. "Yes," he said. "She does." Daniel nodded. "I'll go and see her this week." Daniel went on the Thursday. He told Samuel about it on the phone that same evening, his voice careful and measured, the way it always was when he was navigating something emotionally significant. Esther had been at her flat. She was alone now. Robert had died in a car accident the previous year, a fact Samuel already knew from Margaret. Daniel had sat with her at her kitchen table, a different kitchen, a different table but the same Esther, and told her everything the way Samuel had told him. Plain. Direct. Complete. "How did she take it?" Samuel asked. There was a pause. "She didn't say very much," Daniel said. "She just sat there. For a long time. And then she said, I always hoped I was wrong." Just that. Another pause. Then she cried, "Dad. I don't think I've ever seen Mum cry like that. Not when Robert died. Not even when we left the house. She sat at the table and cried." Samuel was standing by the window of his flat, looking at the concrete wall and the narrow strip of night sky above it. He did not say anything for a moment. "She asked about you," Daniel said quietly. "She asked how you were. She asked where you were living." "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth. The hardware shop. The flat. That you were okay." He stopped. "She asked if you hated her." The strip of night sky above the wall was very dark and very still. "What did you say?" Samuel asked. "I said no," Daniel said. "I said you had never once in 15 years said a single bitter word about her. I told her that was just who you are." Samuel closed his eyes. "She said she'd like to see you," Daniel said. "When you're ready. If you're ever ready." She said there was no pressure. She wanted you to know." He stood by the window for a long time after he hung up. The city moved around him the way it always did, distant traffic, a siren fading, the sound of a window closing somewhere above. The small sounds of a world going about its business. He thought about the bench in the park. He thought about the rubber band on his Bible. He thought about a woman at a kitchen table, crying in a way her children had never seen her cry before. He thought about a morning 15 years ago when a woman in a red dress had walked down the center aisle of a church and the world had broken. He thought about what Pastor Jeremiah had said. She wrote it down. Everything. In case it can do any good. For your name. Tomorrow, he decided. He would call Jeremiah tomorrow and ask what came next. He would find out what the written confession meant, legally and practically, and what, if anything, could still be set right. And perhaps, when enough time had passed, when the ground had settled a little more under this new truth, perhaps he would call Esther. Not yet. But perhaps. Jeremiah answered on the first ring, as though he had been expecting the call. They met the following Saturday morning at a small cafe near the hospital. Neutral ground, Jeremiah had suggested, which struck Samuel as the kind of practical thoughtfulness that came from years of sitting with people in difficult conversations. They took a table near the window. The morning was still cold. The cafe smelled of coffee and warm bread and the particular weekend slowness of a city that had, for once, nowhere urgent to be. Jeremiah ordered 2 coffees without asking and slid one across the table. Angelina passed away 4 days ago, he said. Samuel looked at his cup. I see. Peacefully. In the night. She had been declining quickly in the week since your visit. He paused. She knew you came. It mattered to her more than I can easily tell you. Samuel nodded but said nothing. I have the written statement, Jeremiah continued. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a folded envelope on the table between them. Her full confession. Signed and dated. The nurse is named. The hospital is named. The dates are as specific as she could make them. He pushed the envelope slightly closer to Samuel. This belongs to you. What you do with it is entirely your decision. Samuel looked at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. It was lighter than he had expected. Thin. A few sheets of paper inside. It seemed almost impossible that something so light could contain an accounting of so much damage. He put it in his coat pocket without opening it. The church, Samuel said. Grace Fellowship. Do they know? Jeremiah wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I spoke to Elder Raymond last week. He is the only one still in leadership from your time. The others have moved on or retired. I told him what had happened. I told him about the confession. He paused carefully. He was not a comfortable man to speak to, Mr. Allen. He knew, I think, before I finished telling him, what it meant for what they had done. What they had allowed to happen. What did he say? He said he needed time. Jeremiah looked at him steadily. But he also said, and I want you to hear this exactly as he said it, he said, we owe Samuel Allen everything we failed to give him. If he will let us, we will try to give it back. Samuel looked out of the cafe window at the street outside. A woman was walking past with 2 small children, one on either side, each holding one of her hands. The children were trying to swing themselves off the ground by her arms. She was laughing, holding on. I'm 57 years old, Samuel said quietly. I work in a hardware shop. I live in a 2-room flat with a window that looks at a wall. He said it without self-pity, just as a plain statement of where things stood. There is no ministry to return to. There is no congregation waiting. There is nothing to restore, practically speaking. I know, Jeremiah said. So what does it mean, giving it back? Jeremiah was quiet for a moment. I think it means the congregation standing up and saying publicly what they should have stood up and said 15 years ago. That they were wrong. That you were innocent. That they failed you. He paused. For some people, that kind of acknowledgement, the public kind, in the place where the wrong was done, matters. It is not nothing. Samuel thought about this. It was true that it was not nothing. He had thought about that church, that specific building, that specific altar, more times than he could count over 15 years. Not with longing, exactly. Not with anger, exactly. With a kind of unresolved feeling that had no clean name, the way you feel about a place where something important happened to you, something that changed everything, and you have never been able to go back and simply stand in it as the person you became afterward. Let me think about it, he said. He thought about it for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, other things moved forward on their own. Jeremiah had quietly shared the written confession with certain people. Not publicly, not carelessly, but with the specific individuals whose knowledge of it mattered most. Elder Raymond took it to the remaining church board. The board met in emergency session. There were apparently significant tears and significant arguments, and at least one elder who resigned in shame. Samuel heard this from Jeremiah in pieces over 2 phone calls, and listened to it all with the calm of a man who has no energy left for other people's drama about a situation that cost him everything. The nurse named in the confession, a woman called Donna who was now working at a different clinic across the city, was contacted. Samuel did not know the details of that conversation and did not ask for them. That was a matter between Donna and her own conscience and whatever professional body governed what she had done. Samuel had given Jeremiah his statement, his name, his permission to use the confession as needed. Beyond that, he was done. What he was not done with, what he found himself returning to quietly in the evenings by his window, was the question of Esther. Daniel had said she wanted to see him. That she had asked where he was living. That she had asked if he hated her. He had been turning those 3 facts over in his mind for 2 weeks like smooth stones in a pocket. Worn smooth by handling. Familiar by now. She had said, I always hoped I was wrong. He had thought about that sentence more than any other. It was the sentence of a woman who had never fully closed the door. Who had lived with the doubt all those years. Who had made her choices, Leaving, moving on, remarrying, not because she was certain but because she could not find another way to survive the uncertainty. He understood that. He had made his own choices on the basis of things he could not fully see clearly. They had both been navigating in the dark on opposite sides of the same lie. He picked up his phone on a Wednesday evening. He put it down. He picked it up again. He dialed. It rang 4 times and he had almost decided she wasn't going to answer when she did. Samuel. Just his name. She had seen it on the screen, of course. But the way she said it, not surprised, not guarded, not any of the things he might have expected. Just his name, quietly, as though she had been half expecting this call and had decided, when it came, simply to answer it honestly. Esther, he said. A silence. Not an uncomfortable one. The silence of 2 people who have known each other for a long time and do not need to fill every space with words. Daniel told me, he said. About Angelina. About the confession. Yes, she said. I wanted to, I'm not sure what I wanted exactly. I think I just wanted to hear your voice. Another silence. He heard her breathe. I owe you an apology, she said. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't come close to enough. But I need to say it. I believed her, Samuel. I believed her when I should have fought harder to believe you. You believed what anyone in your position would have believed, he said. The evidence, such as it was, pointed one way. I'm not going to ask you to carry guilt for that. I left you, she said. Her voice was very steady, but underneath the steadiness he could hear something straining. You were innocent and I left you. And you spent 15 years. Esther. He said her name gently, the way you stop someone who is about to walk somewhere painful. I forgave Angelina. I can certainly forgive you. You don't need to punish yourself. The silence that followed was different from the others. Softer. Like something releasing. How are you? She asked after a moment. Really? How are you? I'm all right, he said. I am genuinely all right. He looked out at his window at the concrete wall and the narrow strip of night sky. I have a small life. But it's mine and there's peace in it. That's more than a lot of people have. Daniel says you work in a hardware shop. I do. Do you like it? He thought about it. The smell of paint and sawdust. Mr. Hennessy's complete lack of curiosity. The woman choosing yellow for her kitchen. The quiet of it. I do actually, he said. He heard something that might have been a small laugh. Just barely. Just the edge of one. The sound of a person finding something both sad and gentle at the same time. Samuel, she said. Yes. I'd like to see you. If you're open to that. Just to sit with you. To see your face. I keep trying to picture how you look now and I can't. 15 years is a long time. He was quiet for a moment. I have gray hair now, he said. So do I, she said. This time they both heard the small laugh, his and then hers layering over it, and for just a moment, in the tiny warm space created by 2 people laughing softly on either end of a phone call late on a Wednesday evening, something that had been frozen for a very long time moved just slightly. Sunday, he said. After church. There's a cafe near the park. I'll text you the address. Sunday, she agreed. He hung up. He sat in his chair by the window. Outside the city was dark and ordinary and going about its business. He realized sitting there that for the first time in a very long time he was looking forward to something. The Sunday he was supposed to meet Esther, something else happened first. He had not planned to go to church. He had not attended a regular Sunday service in years, not since his suspension, not since the move, not through any of the 15 years in between. He had his quiet daily prayer and his worn Bible and his bench in the park, and that had been enough. He had not wanted to walk into someone else's congregation as the man he had become, stripped of his role, stripped of his name, a man the church had decided it could no longer stand behind. But that Sunday morning he woke up earlier than usual, and lay in the gray pre-dawn light of his small bedroom and felt something that he had not felt on a Sunday morning for a very long time. He wanted to go. Not to Grace Fellowship. That was a different question for a different day. Just to church. Just to be in a room with people who were singing, and to be one of them, and to let the music do what music does on Sunday mornings. He knew of a small church 2 streets from his flat. He had walked past it dozens of times. It had a hand-painted sign outside and flower boxes in the windows, and on Sunday mornings the sound of someone playing a keyboard drifted out through the open doors and onto the street. He had always slowed down as he walked past. He had never gone in. That morning he went in. The church was smaller inside than it looked from the street. 20, perhaps 25 rows of wooden chairs, not pews, chairs, the stackable kind, arranged in a gentle arc facing a low platform at the front. The walls were plain white with 2 framed Bible verses in simple frames, and someone had strung small warm lights along the beams of the ceiling that gave the whole room the feeling of being gently held. There were perhaps 60 people inside. Not a large congregation. Not the 400 of Grace Fellowship. Just 60 ordinary people in their Sunday clothes, most of them already on their feet, singing along with the keyboard player. A teenage girl, young enough to be Samuel's granddaughter, playing with her eyes closed, and the complete unself-conscious joy of someone doing the thing they were made to do. A man near the door, an usher young with a wide smile and a white shirt slightly too big for him, handed Samuel a printed order of service and said, "Welcome, brother. Sit anywhere you like." That was all. No second glance. No recognition. No careful, loaded pause of someone trying to place a face. Just, "Welcome, sit anywhere." Samuel took a seat near the back. He held the order of service in his hands without reading it. He looked around the room at the ordinary faces of ordinary people. A grandmother near the front singing with her eyes shut and one hand raised, a family of 4 with a toddler who was trying to eat the order of service, 2 teenage boys in the third row doing a bad job of pretending they weren't on their phones. He felt something move in his chest. Not quite sadness. Not quite joy. Something in between, or something made of both. The feeling of a person returning to a landscape they once loved after a very long absence, finding it changed and themselves changed, and discovering that despite everything, it still feels like something they belong to. The music shifted into a slower song. Something Samuel did not recognize, newer than his time with a different rhythm, but the words were familiar in the way that certain words are always familiar, because they are older than any particular melody. "You are good. You are good. And your mercy endures forever." He did not sing along. Not yet. He just sat and listened and let it wash over him, and somewhere in the middle of the second chorus he realized, with a quiet surprise, that his eyes were full. Not from grief. Not from loss. From something he had almost forgotten the feeling of. He was, in this small room with its string lights and its stackable chairs and its 60 ordinary people, not alone. The service lasted an hour and a half. The pastor, a round-faced man of about 45 with an easy manner and a slight gap between his front teeth, preached from the book of Job. Not the suffering parts, which was what people usually preached from Job. The end parts. The restoration. The part where everything that was taken away comes back, not identical to what it was before, but real and full and present. Samuel sat very still and listened to every word. Afterward, the pastor found him near the door as people were filing out. The man had that particular quality that Samuel recognized from his own pastoral years, the ability to notice the person in the room who most needed to be noticed. "First time with us?" he said pleasantly. "Yes," Samuel said. "Welcome. I'm Pastor Gordon." He extended his hand. "Samuel," Samuel said and shook it and did not add anything else. "Well, Samuel, we're glad you came." Pastor Gordon said it the way people say things when they mean them, not as a formula, not as a script, but as a simple, direct statement of fact. "Come back whenever you like. The door is always open." Samuel thanked him and walked out into the cool Sunday morning. He stood on the pavement for a moment, the way he had stood outside the hospital on the morning he visited Angelina, breathing, steadying, feeling the shape of what had just happened. He looked at his watch. He had 2 hours before he was supposed to meet Esther at the cafe. He walked to his bench in the park. He sat there for an hour just thinking. He thought about the sermon on Job. He thought about the end of the story, not just the restoration of possessions and family, which was the part people most often quoted, but the quieter thing underneath it. The way Job, at the very end, after all the suffering and all the arguments and all the long silence between him and God, arrives not at an explanation but at a presence. Not an answer. A presence. Samuel had thought about that a great deal over 15 years. He had preached in his ministry years that faith was about answers, that if you believed correctly and prayed correctly and lived correctly, things would go correctly. He had not been dishonest in preaching it. He had believed it. But 15 years of living in a life where things had gone as wrong as they possibly could, and still finding God present in the middle of it, not fixing it, not explaining it, but simply there, steady in the silence, had given him a different understanding. He knew things now that he had not known as a pastor. He was not sure he would trade the knowing even for the years. He was not sure. But he was not sure he wouldn't either. He sat on his bench and was honest about that, the way he tried to be honest about everything. The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and cinnamon. He arrived 5 minutes early and took a table by the window and ordered a coffee and sat with his hands around the cup and watched the door. She came in at exactly the time they had agreed. He saw her before she saw him, which gave him a few seconds to look at her without the complexity of being looked at in return. She was wearing a dark green coat he did not recognize, her hair shorter than he remembered, mostly gray now with just traces of the dark it had once been. She moved with the same quiet composure he had always loved in her, not rushing, not hesitant, just present in herself, belonging to the space she was in. She scanned the room. Found him. For a moment neither of them moved. Then she walked across to his table and he stood up, not from any formal politeness but simply because sitting felt like the wrong thing, like it didn't match the weight of the moment, and they stood across the table from each other and just looked. 15 years. He had gray hair now. She had said so too. He looked, he supposed, exactly what he was. A man who had been through something long and hard and had come out the other side still standing but marked by the crossing. Samuel, she said. Esther, he said. And then, because words were not yet the right thing, she stepped forward and put her arms around him. Not tentatively, not carefully, but completely, her arms around his shoulders and her face against his neck the way she had always held him, the particular way that had always felt, in 19 years of marriage, like coming home. He held her back. Just as completely. Just as honestly. They stood like that for a moment that was longer than a moment, in the middle of a warm cafe on a Sunday morning while the world went about its business around them. When they stepped back, her eyes were bright. You look well, she said, which was not quite true and they both knew it, but it was the kind of thing you say when what you actually mean is, I am so glad you are still here. So do you, he said. Which was true. They sat down. The waitress came and Esther ordered tea. They sat with their drinks between them and the window beside them and 15 years of distance slowly, carefully beginning to close. They talked for nearly 3 hours. Not about the big things at first. Not about Angelina or the confession or any of the specific machinery of what had happened. They talked about the children. About Ruby and the way she grabbed the cheese at every opportunity. About Daniel and the school where he taught, and the way he had grown into himself. About Thomas, Claire's husband, who Esther said had turned out to be the quietest and most steadfast person she had ever met, which she meant as the highest compliment. They talked about Robert. Esther spoke about him with a calm, honest sorrow. He had been a good man, she said. Kind in the particular way of someone who didn't need to be seen being kind. She had been grateful for him. She had loved him in the way that was available to her, which she said without apology or explanation, and Samuel respected her for it. They talked about the hardware shop. About Mr. Hennessy, who at 81 still came in 3 mornings a week and sat on a stool behind the counter and told the same 4 stories to anyone who would listen. About the yellow paint the woman had chosen for her kitchen. About the keys Samuel had cut, hundreds and hundreds of keys over the years, each one opening something for someone. Esther laughed at that, a real laugh, the one he remembered, the one that involved her whole face. He had forgotten how much he had missed that laugh. Eventually, gently, they got to the harder things. Esther set her cup down and looked at him directly. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer me honestly, not kindly. All right, he said. Do you have anger? Toward me? Real anger underneath the grace. She paused. Because you are a man who is very good at choosing not to show what he feels. And I don't want grace that is covering something. I would rather have the truth. Samuel looked at her. He thought about it honestly. He held the question up in the light and looked at it carefully. There was a time, he said slowly, when I felt something very close to anger toward you. Not the hot kind. The cold kind. The kind that lives quietly. In the years right after you left, right after the remarriage. He paused. But I made a decision a long time ago not to feed it. And decisions like that, if you hold to them long enough, they become true. The anger is not gone. It became something else. Something quieter. He looked at her. What I feel now, sitting here with you, is not anger. It is grief still for what was lost. But it is not anger. Esther held his gaze. That is a very honest answer, she said. You asked for honest. I did. She was quiet for a moment. I have anger too, she said. Not at you. At her. At myself. At the elders who suspended you without fighting harder for you. At 15 years that cannot be given back. She stopped. I am working on it. So am I, Samuel said. They looked at each other across the table. 2 people on the far side of something immense. Both of them marked by it. Both of them, somehow, still themselves. What happens now? Esther said. Not urgently. Just asking. Samuel looked out of the window at the street. A man walked past with a dog. 2 children on bicycles. A woman closing the zip on her jacket against the wind. I don't know, he said honestly. I think we take it slowly. I think we let ourselves get used to each other again before we try to figure out what any of it means. He looked back at her. But I'd like to keep talking. I'd like to keep sitting across tables from you and talking. Esther looked at him for a long moment. I would like that too, she said. They sat across tables from each other for 4 months. Every Sunday after church, he at the small church with the string lights, she at a congregation closer to her flat. They met at the cafe near the park. Same table by the window, same waitress who eventually stopped asking for their order and just brought 2 coffees and 1 tea without being told. They talked for hours each time. Sometimes about the children, sometimes about the past, sometimes about nothing in particular. A news story, a book one of them had read, the way the park looked in November versus December, the strange comfort of watching seasons change when you are no longer in a hurry about anything. They were careful with each other. That was the right word for it. Not cautious in a cold way, not guarded, but careful. The way you are careful with something that has been broken and mended and is strong again but has earned the right to be handled with attention. Slowly the Sundays became more than Sundays. A Wednesday phone call. A walk through the park one Saturday afternoon. A dinner at Claire and Thomas's house in December, Ruby on Samuel's lap the entire evening, pulling at his collar and offering him pieces of her food with great generosity and no hygiene. Esther, watching from across the table, had smiled at him over the chaos of it, that private smile, the one that belonged only to the two of them, and for a moment it was as though the 15 years had not vanished but had become transparent, like glass, and through them he could see clearly both what had been lost and what was still, impossibly, still there. January brought the church. Elder Raymond had been patient. He had not pushed. He had sent one careful letter in November, through Jeremiah, saying that whenever Samuel was ready, if he was ever ready, the church wished to make a formal, public acknowledgement of what had happened. No timeline. No pressure. His choice entirely. Samuel read the letter and put it on the table beside his Bible and looked at it for several weeks. He talked to Esther about it one Sunday in January, the coldest Sunday of the year, both of them wrapped in coats at their table with the cafe's heating working hard against the frost outside. Do you want to go back there? She asked. I don't know if want is the right word, he said. I think there is something unfinished in that building. Not something I need to resolve, but something that needs to be witnessed. By me. In that space. He paused. I stood at that altar for 14 years. And then I was led off the platform in front of 400 people and I never went back. I would like to walk back in through those doors as the man I am now. As the man who was always innocent. I would like to stand in that room and let that be true in that room. Esther held her tea in both hands and looked at him. Then we go, she said simply. It was arranged for a Saturday evening service. Not a Sunday. Jeremiah had suggested Saturday and Samuel had agreed. Sunday felt too much like a performance. Saturday felt quieter. More honest. Word had spread through the congregation as word does. Samuel did not know exactly how many people knew what to expect that evening. He did not ask. He and Esther arrived together. Daniel and Claire were already inside. Daniel near the back, standing with Thomas, who had insisted on coming. Claire was in the 3rd row with Ruby asleep against her shoulder, having been completely uncooperative about nap time and consequently exhausted by early evening. The building was almost full. Samuel stood at the double doors for a moment before going in. He could hear the murmur of voices inside, the sound of a congregation settling. He looked up at the front of the building, the hand-lettered sign above the doors, Grace Fellowship Church, the same sign that had been there when he built the place with 20 people in a rented hall 29 years ago. Esther stood beside him. Ready? She said. He looked at the doors. He thought about the last time he had walked out through them. The evening of the elders' meeting 15 years ago, the folded letter in his pocket, the orange sunset behind the buildings. Yes, he said. He pushed open the doors and walked in. The room went quiet as he entered. Not the shocked, terrible quiet of that first Sunday 15 years ago. A different kind, attentive, weighted, respectful. The quiet of people who know that something significant is happening and want to receive it properly. He walked down the center aisle. The same aisle down which Angelina had walked in her red dress. He walked it slowly, looking straight ahead, and he felt the eyes of the congregation on him the way you feel the sun on your face. Present, warm, impossible to ignore. Esther walked beside him. At the 3rd row, Claire reached out and took her mother's hand as they passed, and fell into step beside them. Daniel and Thomas moved from the back and joined them. The 5 of them, Samuel, Esther, Daniel, Claire, Thomas, walked to the front of the church together. Elder Raymond was waiting at the platform. He was older than Samuel remembered. His gray beard was white now, and his face had the deep lines of a man in his late 70s who had lived every year of it. He looked at Samuel the way a man looks at someone he has wronged and has spent a long time knowing it, with a particular combination of sorrow and relief that comes when the debt you have been carrying finally has a chance to be laid down. He shook Samuel's hand. Then, in a gesture that was not planned and not rehearsed, that came from something much older and more instinctive, he held it in both of his and bowed his head over it and said simply, "Forgive us, Samuel. We failed you. Forgive us." The room was very still. Samuel looked at this old man, this man who had signed a letter suspending him, who had failed to fight for him, who had let the machinery of institutional caution run over an innocent life, and felt the full weight of it. He did not rush past it. He let it be what it was. Then he said, "I forgive you, Raymond. I forgave you a long time ago." Elder Raymond nodded. His eyes were wet. He stepped back. A microphone was offered. Samuel took it. He looked out at the congregation of Grace Fellowship, faces he recognized, some older now, mixed with faces he had never seen before, new members who had arrived in the years he was gone. 400 people or close to it looking back at him. He stood at the pulpit he had stood at for 14 years. The same pulpit. The same altar behind it with its white lilies, Esther's choice, always Esther's choice, fresh and bright in their vases. He did not have a speech prepared. He did not need one. "I am not going to stand here and tell you that the last 15 years were easy," he said. "They were the hardest years of my life. I lost things I will not get back. I lost time with my children that I will never recover. I lost years with a woman I have loved since I was 23 years old." He glanced at Esther. "Those losses are real and they are permanent, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." The room was completely silent. "But I will tell you what 15 years of carrying an impossible weight in the presence of God taught me," he continued. "It taught me that faith is not a protection from suffering. It is a companion through it. It taught me that forgiveness is not a feeling. It is a decision you make every morning when you wake up, and some mornings it costs more than others. And it taught me that a man's life cannot be taken from him entirely, as long as he holds on to the truth of who he is." He paused. "I was innocent. I am innocent. I always was. And God knew that even when no one else did. Even when I was alone in a small flat looking at a concrete wall, God knew." He looked out at the faces before him. "That is enough. That has always been enough." The silence after he stopped speaking was the good kind. The kind that means what was said has landed somewhere deep and is being held there. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then others joining, then the whole room, and it rose and filled the space the way music had once filled it, the way 400 voices singing had once filled it, warm and full and alive. Samuel stood at the pulpit and let it wash over him. Beside him, Esther reached up and took his hand. He held it. They did not remarry quickly. That was not who they were. Neither of them was a person who moved quickly toward important things. They moved slowly and honestly, the way people move when they have learned that important things deserve to be approached with care. Through the winter and into the spring they continued to meet. Sundays at the cafe. Wednesday phone calls. Walks. Dinners. Gradually, over months, the careful distance between them became comfortable closeness, and the comfortable closeness became something warmer, and the something warmer became, in its own unhurried time, something neither of them felt the need to name out loud because it was simply obvious. On a Friday evening in April, not a special occasion, not a planned moment, just an ordinary Friday evening when they had been walking through the park after sharing a meal at the small restaurant near Samuel's flat, they stopped at his bench. The one he thought of as his. The park was quiet at that hour, just the blue dusk settling over the trees and the last birds calling to each other before dark. They sat down together. Samuel looked at the park, at the trees coming into their spring leaves, pale green and new, the kind of green that only exists for a few weeks each year and is so fresh and clean it seems almost unreal. He looked at it for a while without speaking. Then he said, not dramatically, not nervously, just truthfully, the way he had learned to say the things that mattered most. "I never stopped loving you, Esther. Not for a single day in 15 years. I want you to know that." Esther was looking at the trees too. She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I think I always knew. Even when I couldn't let myself hold on to it, I always knew." "I'm not asking you to go back to what we were," he said. "We can't go back. Too much has happened and too much has changed and we are different people than we were. But I am asking if you would be willing to go forward. With me. As whoever we are now." Esther turned to look at him. The last of the evening light was on his face. His gray hair. His deep eyes. The lines that 15 years had put there, which she found she did not want to imagine away. They were part of him. They were the map of what he had survived. "Yes," she said. "Just that." Quietly, completely, without hesitation. He took her hand. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat on the bench in the park as the dusk became dark and the stars appeared one by one above the bare branches of the trees, and neither of them felt the need to say anything more. They married in the summer. Quietly. Just the family, Daniel and his partner, Claire and Thomas and Ruby, Margaret and her husband, Jeremiah and his wife, Pastor Gordon from the small church with the string lights. A garden, a few flowers, a simple meal afterward. Ruby, who was 2.5 and had strong opinions about everything, decided that the most important part of the ceremony was the flowers on the table and attempted to redistribute them throughout the garden. This required the full attention of both her parents and her uncle Daniel and created a running commentary from Claire that made everyone laugh, and the laughter was, perhaps, the best thing in the room. Samuel and Esther stood in the garden and said the promises they had said before, a lifetime ago, and meant them differently now, not with the clean, unbroken faith of two young people at the start of something, but with the harder, more knowing faith of two people who had been to the far edge of everything and found their way back to each other. For better, for worse. For richer, for poorer. In sickness and in health. They knew what those words meant now. They had lived inside them. They moved into a modest house together on a quiet street not far from Claire and Thomas. It had a small garden and a kitchen with a window that looked out onto the garden rather than a concrete wall, which Samuel found he appreciated more than he could easily say. He kept his job at the hardware shop. There was no reason to leave it. He liked Mr. Hennessy and his 4 stories. He liked the smell of paint and sawdust. He liked the quiet usefulness of it, helping people find the things they needed to fix what was broken or build what was new. Esther returned to the kind of work she had always done best, not the formal kind with a title but the human kind. She began volunteering with a women's support organization 2 mornings a week. She was, within 3 months, the person everyone came to first. On Sundays they went to the small church with the string lights, together. They sat near the middle. They were not special guests. They were not the pastor and his wife, occupying a specific and weighted role. They were simply members. Samuel, when asked, said he had once been in ministry. He said it the way you mention a country you used to live in, with affection and distance in equal measure. He never returned to pastoral leadership. He was asked once, gently, by Pastor Gordon, whether he had ever thought about it. He thought about it honestly before he answered. "I did what I was given to do in that season," he said. "I did it for 14 years and I gave it everything I had. I think that season is finished. What I have now is something different. Smaller maybe. But it's mine and I'm grateful for it." Pastor Gordon had nodded, understanding completely. The story of Samuel Allen did not end with a triumph. There was no great public vindication, no newspaper article, no ceremony large enough to match the scale of what had been taken. The written confession was used in the necessary places. The church, the professional body that dealt with the nurse, the quiet correction of the record. But the world is not a court of justice and it does not balance its accounts with precision. Some people who had believed the lie went on believing it. Some never knew there had been a lie at all. The gossip of 15 years ago had long since dissolved into the ordinary noise of a city that had newer things to be interested in. Samuel understood this. He had made his peace with it. What the story ended with was smaller than triumph and more durable. It ended with a man and a woman in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee, listening to the radio, watching the garden through the window as the light changed on the grass. It ended with a granddaughter named Ruby who arrived every Wednesday and immediately began reorganizing the house to her specifications and laughing at everything. It ended with Daniel's Sunday evening calls, warmer now than they had ever been, full of the small details of his week, the way a son talks to a father when the long careful distance between them has finally closed. It ended with Samuel sitting in his armchair one evening in October, the same month he had walked into the hospital to forgive a dying woman, almost a year ago now. His worn Bible on the table beside him, Esther reading in the chair across from his, the room quiet and warm and full of the particular contentment of two people who have found their way back to each other and are not taking a moment of it for granted. He looked at her. She looked up from her book and caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She shook her head slightly, the smallest of smiles, and went back to her book. Samuel sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the room around him, the small, ordinary, irreplaceable room, and thought about something he had read once, years ago, in a book whose title he could no longer remember. Something about how God does not always prevent the story from going wrong. But he never abandons the story. He stays in it all the way through, patient and present, working in the long way, the slow way toward something good. Samuel Allen had lived long enough to know that this was true. Not as a sermon. Not as a theology. As a life. His life. Small, marked, redeemed, and entirely his own. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.